wonderful to have all of you here with us today. Welcome to our informational session on the Justice Catalyst Fellowship. The recording of this session will be made available later this week, along with captioning. And if you have any questions or need any accommodations, please email us at fellowships@justicecatalyst.org. We have the chat function turned off for today's webinar, but we will be taking questions via the Q&A chat box. We'll reserve time at various points throughout the webinar to answer those questions. With that, some quick introductions. I am Renee Schomp. I'm Deputy Director here at Justice Catalyst. I myself am a former Equal Justice Works Fellow out of law school and have spent the majority of my career as an attorney working in the legal nonprofit space. I'm now here at Justice Catalyst Partnerships and Justice Catalyst Access Fund, doing a lot of our innovative legal work with launching new organizations and projects across a wide range of issue areas here in the US. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to our Executive Director, Jacob Lipton, to introduce himself.
Thanks, Renee. I'm Jacob Lipton, he, him pronouns. I am the Executive Director of Justice Catalyst Partnerships and also Justice Catalyst Access Fund. And I will pass to Elahe.
Thank you, Jacob. Hi, everyone. My name is Elahe. I'm the Program Associate at Justice Catalyst. I help Renee and Jacob run our various programming here, which you'll hear more about. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elahe, and a big shout out to Elahe for doing all of the Zoom background work throughout this webinar. She'll be dropping links in the chat and doing all kinds of things to support us making this possible today. So thank you, Elahe. All right, so quick agenda overview of what we'll be covering. First, we're going to be diving into a little bit about our Justice Catalyst ecosystem here. And then we're going to be going over our new fellowship, our antitrust fellowship, which some of you may have heard about in our webinar last year. And we're going to be joined by Pamela Gilbert to talk to us a little bit about that fellowship. Then we're going to be launching into a deep dive into our Justice Catalyst Fellowship program more broadly and doing FAQs and Q&A at the end. We're also lucky enough to be joined by Sarah Medina Camascoli, a former Justice Catalyst Fellow, who's going to be sharing with you a little bit about her experience as a fellow and alum. All right, with that, let's talk about our ecosystem just to give you a wider range lens into the work that we do here at Justice Catalyst. So we're a nonprofit that uses grant funding and philanthropic advising to support justice-focused legal innovation in a variety of different ways. We have a focus on seeding new organizations and sometimes projects at existing organizations and on fostering collaboration between the different parts of the public interest legal system that we often see as very siloed here in the US. We have provided seed or early stage funding for dozens of nonprofits, other organizations, and new projects. And some of the organizations or projects that we launch are actually relatively in-house. We have a sister organization, Justice Catalyst Law, which is focused on generating cases with broad and replicable impact, often using commercial tools for social justice. For example, Justice Catalyst Law is involved in antitrust litigation against the bail bond industry, antitrust and other legal theories against other parts of the prison industry, cases in the housing space, drug rehab, and more. We also launched Justice Catalyst Access Fund, which is a nonprofit that provides recoverable grants to support nonprofits and other public interest litigators. It's a novel structure where organizations can draw down funds to support their work and repay out of case recoveries or fee awards and only have to pay back out of those awards. So if they don't win, they don't have to. Finally, we have Justice Catalyst Fellowships, which helps to launch new creative projects and new legal careers. So with that quick overview and synopsis of the facets of our ecosystem here at Justice Catalyst, I want to dive in, as I mentioned, to a little bit of an overview of our new antitrust litigation fellowship. So some of you may have already heard us talk about this last year, but in partnership with the Committee to Support Antitrust Laws, or COSAL, We have focused on antitrust litigation in this fellowship, focused on placing fellows at some of the top plaintiff-side antitrust firms across the country. This fellowship is named after Jonathan W. Cuneo, a co-founder of COSAL, who was a prominent figure in antitrust litigation, championing consumer rights against influential entities. This fellowship is a tribute to his legacy and is focused on fostering a path for emerging leaders in antitrust litigation to continue the pursuit of accountability against powerful entities. Elahe is going to drop a longer bio about Jonathan in the chat. We here at Justice Catalyst believe that the enforcement of antitrust laws is really crucial to promote class equity in the US, and that by preventing large corporations from dominating markets and engaging in anti-competitive practices, antitrust laws can help create a level playing field for small businesses and consumers, leading to increased competition, innovation, and fair prices. This in turn can help reduce economic inequality and promote a more equitable distribution of wealth and opportunities for all. With that, I want to introduce to you Pamela Gilbert. Pam, feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video. Pamela Gilbert is the legal representative and executive director of COSAL and a partner at the law firm Cuneo, Gilbert & LaDuca. She is quite the rock star powerhouse. She has over 35 years of experience in advocacy work in Washington, D.C., and has testified over 50 times and has also made dozens of appearances in national print and electronic media. Welcome, Pam, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I think I was able to unmute, but not put my video. Do you guys?
We can see you and hear you.
Oh, you can. Yay.
Yes.
Okay. So huge apologies to everybody. I'm in Santa Cruz, California on vacation with my family, but I thought this was very important. So I've stepped out of lunch, but I'm not in the most opportune place to do this. So I apologize, but I'm going to.
We're living vicariously through you. It looks fabulous.
It's pretty great. It's pretty great. But anyway, it's really great to be here. And again, I would usually do this in a quieter place and it would be a little better, but it's really thrilled to be joining you. And I always love hearing all about the wonderful things that Justice Catalyst does. And it makes me so proud to be partnering with all of you. So let me get to the business at hand. So I represent and I'm the executive director of the Committee to Support the Antitrust Laws. The acronym is COSAL. We were established almost 40 years ago in 1986 to promote and support the enactment, preservation, and enforcement of a strong body of antitrust laws in the U.S. We are the only organization that's dedicated to lobbying for strong antitrust laws and particularly for effective private enforcement, which is what our members do. Our membership includes about 50 plaintiffs, antitrust law firms from all across the country that bring antitrust lawsuits. They primarily focus on class action lawsuits on behalf of consumers, workers, and small businesses against large corporations that are abusing their market power and violating the antitrust laws. And as Renee said, COSAL was founded in part with the help of my late partner, Jonathan Cuneo. John had come off working in the House of Representatives on the House Judiciary Committee, where he was antitrust counsel. And he realized when he got off the Hill that there were armies of lobbyists for big businesses walking the halls of Congress advocating to weaken the antitrust laws. But on the other side of that, the only folks who were really supporting the antitrust laws were mainly academics, state enforcement officials like state attorneys general, and the staff and members of Congress in the Congress themselves. But as far as having a lobbying force, a private interest lobbying force for the antitrust laws, it really didn't exist. And that's where COSAL came in. So he and joined up with some other attorneys that were in the antitrust sphere, and they founded COSAL. COSAL, can you still see me? Because my phone's doing funny things.
Yes, we can.
Everything's okay, great. So COSAL has long had a goal of encouraging recent law grads to become plaintiffs' antitrust lawyers. We want to, of course, increase our ranks with all these fabulous folks who are coming out of law schools. We also, though, want to increase the diversity within the antitrust plaintiffs bar, and we realize our best route to do that is by focusing on newer lawyers and younger lawyers. And so we are now partnering with Justice Catalyst on this fellowship to help COSAL meet both of those goals, and to strengthen, in general, the private enforcement of the antitrust laws. So we're super excited to have this partnership with Justice Catalyst and the Jonathan W. Cuneo COSAL Justice Catalyst Fellowship. The fellowship is designed to offer opportunities to new lawyers to try out the plaintiff's antitrust practice, and to give these lawyers a chance to participate in important groundbreaking litigation, and also to engage in the broader policy work of COSAL. So the fellowship will also offer great networking opportunities at various COSAL events throughout the year. The very first COSAL Justice Catalyst Fellowship candidate hasn't started yet. Her name is Dejana Richardson, and we are very happy to note that she is going to be working at my law firm, Cuneo, Gilbert, and LaDuca, starting after Labor Day next month. So we're super thrilled to be welcoming Dejana. So just to focus on the fellowship itself, it's going to have two parts, and one is to work as an associate at a COSAL member law firm, and to make sure that the fellow is assigned to at least one antitrust litigation. I'm going to guess it'll end up being more than one. COSAL members are bringing some of the most cutting edge antitrust actions that are available today in a wide variety of industries, including big tech. A lot of, we're suing Google, we're suing Apple, we're suing Facebook, but also in the food and agriculture sector, in the pharmaceutical sector, in healthcare, and in financial services. So we really run the gamut. And so the opportunity for the fellow could be quite wide ranging. Our firms also, and more, labor issues are becoming more important in the antitrust sphere. And a lot of our members represent workers against companies who use their market power to decrease wages and worsen working conditions. So essentially, it's anywhere there's corporate concentration and opportunities for anti-competitive behavior, COSAL firms are there to help police the marketplace and make it fairer and more equitable for everybody. So that the one piece of the fellowship is to actually work actively on an antitrust litigation, or more than one. And then the other part of the fellowship is to get to be engaged in the policy work that COSAL does, which is more my world. And so that COSAL does about 9 in-person events every year. In fact, we're hosting one at the Democratic Convention in Chicago next week. But so we host these in-person events. They occur throughout the year and throughout the country. And we bring lawyers together, and very often prominent speakers, prominent public officials, state attorneys general, and academics to discuss different antitrust issues. So the events will give the fellows opportunities to network with lawyers from other member law firms, which could be good for one's career, and then often to hear really important speakers in antitrust and Capitol Hill and federal and state agencies. Another aspect of COSAL work is working on our committees, and so we have a number of committees that work and do very important work in antitrust. And just a few examples: we have an amicus committee where we file amicus briefs in antitrust cases, both in the federal appellate courts and in the Supreme Court, and we'll give an opportunity for fellows to actually work on those briefs. We have a policy committee that analyzes and proposes congressional and federal legislation to strengthen antitrust laws. We have a fairly new climate and antitrust committee that just wrote a paper that's going to appear in the Georgetown Environmental Law Review I believe early next year, that looks at competitors getting together to have more sustainable business practices, analyzing those agreements from an antitrust angle, and concluding that while a lot of right-wingers are claiming that those may be antitrust violations, this paper concludes that those agreements are not antitrust violations, and we're very excited about that. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee where we sponsor a diversity leadership summit every year for folks from underrepresented groups in the antitrust bar to come together and talk about advancing careers and advancing antitrust cases that can help their populations. We also have an Attorney General outreach committee, and we also have a committee that focuses on the federal rules. So there's lots of opportunity. There will be for a fellow to engage in substantive policy activities as well. Whether I have trucks and cars in back of me, I'm gonna end it there. And I don't know if you want me to take questions and answers, but I'm happy to do that if that fits.
Thank you so much, Pam. I think what we can do is if folks have questions, they can email us at fellowships@justicecatalyst.org, and we can get back to you there. And I'm going to do a little bit more about eligibility on COSAL, but I think, Pam, you can go back to your much deserved vacation, and we are so grateful to you for taking the time, and it looks gorgeous there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And again, apologies for where I am. Anyway, thanks.
No, thank you. All right, take care. So thank you all again for hearing about this exciting new fellowship project. I know many of you may have joined to hear about our general Justice Catalyst Fellowship program, and I'm very excited about this project because while we are seeing an increase in the law school academic community on speaking more broadly about career opportunities for attorneys, we still see a dearth of conversation and opportunity brought early on to law students about this kind of plaintiff-side work. And it's really a crucial piece of the legal ecosystem that we want to make sure folks are thinking and talking about and considering for their career opportunities early on in law school. So for the law school career folks that are here, I hope career offices folks that are here, I hope you will share with law students about this new opportunity that we are very excited about. As you can see from this slide, eligibility is for 3Ls and graduates up to 3 years out of law school. You'll be placed in person at a plaintiff-side antitrust law firm. There are opportunities throughout the country. And we selected this past year one fellow for this opportunity, and we will be selecting one or more depending on the applicant pool that we received this year. So please encourage your friends or encourage classmates or others who you think might be a good fit and might be interested to consider applying. All the rest of the details on the application process are available on our website. And again, you can reach out to us anytime with questions at fellowships@justicecatalyst.org. All right, with that, let's dive into the rest of our programming here. I want to talk to you more about our General Justice Catalyst Fellowship, which is a really exciting opportunity to think creatively about our legal system and how we can solve major problems that we see in the world through this project. So through your projects. So our philosophy is really problem-centric. We see successful projects start with a problem in the world and identify a novel and potentially transformative way to resolve it. The fellowship is project-focused. So the main element that we evaluate is the project and secondarily the fellow. We are focused on broad-scale change or systemic work, very often in the litigation space specifically. We don't support projects where direct representation is the primary theory of change, but direct representation can be a component where it's tied to a broader theory of change. And we have a special interest in projects that use systemic litigation to generate direct benefits at scale, such as damages, class actions, or legal enforcement against powerful interests, such as private corporate defendants or prisons, jails, and police departments. With that, I am going to be speaking much more extensively about each of those elements throughout this webinar. So if you feel like you still have question marks after that quick introduction, never fear, I'll be talking a lot more about it. So briefly, an overview of the nuts and bolts of the fellowship. Our hope is that the Justice Catalyst Fellowship can provide recent law school graduates with an opportunity to begin your legal career by undertaking a boundary-pushing project that addresses a pressing problem in the United States. We really hope candidates will think outside of the box of what our law school institutions or what our legal system and institutions traditionally push about the way we think about the law and our legal system as a whole. The basics of this overview are available to read on our website, so I'm not going to linger on them for too much time. But in short, this is an opportunity for a recent law school graduate to partner with a nonprofit organization, a government agency, a union, or a plaintiff-side or public interest private law firm to propose an innovative legal project that you'll work on for 1 year or possibly longer. Our hope is that fellows will be able to identify a host organization that will be a good fit both for them personally and for the project that they seek to propose. And we welcome projects that are initially thought of by the candidate or by the host organization itself. We're going to talk a lot more about all of this going through, but again, that's a brief synopsis. So to that end, let's talk about eligibility requirements. So as long as you graduate from an accredited US law school with either a JD or LLM degree, and you're within 2 years of that graduation, you can apply for the fellowship. For host orgs, like I mentioned, you can partner with an eligible 501c3 nonprofit organization, a plaintiff-side or public interest law firm, union, tribal, local, state, or federal government agency, and work collaboratively with them on the project design. And the project goal is, again, to design an innovative legal project that has strong potential to catalyze structural and broad scale or high volume change within the United States. A little bit more about the host organizations, simply because the Justice Catalyst Fellowship requirements for host organizations differ from those of some of the other larger national fellowship programs. We are open to non-traditional host organizations. They can be small, scrappy nonprofits or law firms. Depending on the project proposed, it can be okay if there isn't even a lawyer on staff at the organization before the fellow begins. And we also, again, accept fellowship projects that are based at non-501c3 entities, like I mentioned several times, unions or government agencies or plaintiff-side or public interest law firms. With that said, we also have plenty of fellowship projects that are based at more traditional 501c3 nonprofit organizations. And from an administrative and logistical perspective, it can be easiest to work with a 501c3 nonprofit organization for your project. With that said, again, we have multiple fellows that are at other types of host entities. As I mentioned, the fellow or the host can both drive the development of the project. Ultimately, it's quite important that you're both on the same page, but we have had successful projects that have derived from all directions. The bottom line is, when you're finding a host organization to partner with, focus on what will be the best fit for you and your project, and take into consideration elements such as expertise and mentorship available. Think about your personality type and what level of autonomy and or support you feel you'll need based on your background, experience, and how you prefer to function, and be realistic about that. Also think about what resources exist at the host organization to advance your project. Think about whether or not coalitions and other relationships with key stakeholders that are necessary to implement your project already exist in the ecosystem within which you'll be working. And about the commitment of the host organization to the issue area, the approach that you plan to take, and the fellowship project as a whole exists and what that commitment is. We have found that a lot of successful applicants apply for the Justice Catalyst Fellowship with a host organization where they have previously interned or externed, but that is by no means a prerequisite for success. All right, and there is a entire page of host organizations that you can see on our website as well. All right. Let's talk briefly about the application timeline. So submissions for our prospectus will open very soon on September 1st. I am going to do a deep dive into what on earth I mean by prospectus in a little bit. But that is going to open on September 1st. Then the full application is going to open on our website via an online form as well, beginning October 15th. The deadline is December 2nd. And interviews will run January to February, with final decisions being made by no later than March 1st. And you again can find this entire timeline on our website. All right, let's talk about priority areas of work. So the Justice Catalyst Fellowship Program has no subject area restrictions whatsoever. I want to start by saying that. We welcome projects focused on any and all issue areas. The fellowship program is primarily US focused, but we occasionally support projects based outside of the country with a close nexus to the US. Elahe will drop a link in the chat to one of our current renewal fellows, Henna Kashal, who has a project that serves as a good example of one that's based outside of the US in Mexico City, but is focused on enforcing US labor laws and also overlaps with US immigration matters. So we get excited about proposed projects across a broad spectrum of topic areas. And as you can see from our current and past fellows, each year we award fellowships focused on varied and diverse topics. We have listed here some of our priority issue areas this year. These are some areas where we have seen a particular lack of funding or received fewer applications than we would like to see, or think there are especially high opportunities for impact. And I want to note that this year, a priority we have added from last year is projects related to climate and environment. I also want to mention that we recognize that a lot of projects will touch upon multiple overlapping issue areas. And in our application form, you'll have the opportunity to note which issue area you view as the primary issue area for your project and which are ancillary or overlapping issue areas. I would be shocked if there was a project that didn't have overlapping issue areas, although they can exist. I would love to hear from all of you who are here on the Zoom with us about what issue areas you think you might be interested in focusing on in your projects. So Elahe is going to go ahead and pull up a poll for us. If you want to answer, you can answer multiple. Are you interested in a project focused on access to medications for opioid use disorder, antitrust, civil rights, climate and environment, economic justice, government accountability or transparency, immigration, incarceration or the criminal legal system, labor, public health, racial justice? We would love to hear, and I'm seeing your answers coming in through that poll. I'm going to give you a moment to answer. This is always one of the more exciting moments in the webinar when we can really hear from you about where you are and what you're thinking. I'm seeing so far almost half of folks so far are saying civil rights as an issue area that they are interested in pursuing a fellowship project in. About a third incarceration in the criminal legal system, 20% or so or quarter on labor, LGBTQIA plus rights, almost a third on racial justice, almost a quarter on workers' rights. Thank you all so much for answering this poll. It's really helpful to see. And almost 7% on access to medications for opioid use disorder as well. So interesting to see all of those issue areas that you are thinking about pursuing projects in. Thank you so much for joining us and answering that poll, everyone. Really appreciate it. All right, so with that, let's talk a little bit about our priority strategies for justice. I just want to flag right now that this is probably going to be one of the most important segments of this webinar. So now is a good time to really listen in, and we'll be able to take questions as well. So first of all, across all strategies for fellowship projects, a key element for us is projects that target powerful actors. We like projects that raise the cost of doing injustice, and sometimes quite literally. For example, damages cases against private actors like corporations or prisons and jails. And our priority strategy for the fellowships program is affirmative litigation, as you can see here on this slide. So by this, I mean impact litigation that's focused on enforcing laws already on the books. in contrast to precedent-setting litigation, or impact litigation that is advancing a replicable legal strategy or developing an affirmative practice in a place that is primarily defensive, such as at a legal aid or public defender office. An example of that last piece is we had a fellow based at NILAG, New York Legal Assistance Group, working across 2 units that were primarily doing defensive litigation. That fellow helped develop affirmative litigation counterclaims that could then be routinely added by all of their other attorneys. For affirmative litigation projects, think about things like this. The timeline. Since impact litigation can take many years, as we know, at what point in the course of the litigation is your fellowship project going to be? It can be successful at different points to get the litigation off the ground, or working on the litigation at a key point in the litigation process. But it's very important for applications to be very well aware of that timeline realistically, and where your project will focus and why your project is going to catalyze that litigation happening in a special and unique way that is necessary and important. Also think really critically about the resources needed realistically to conduct the litigation successfully, and whether the host organization you would be based at has the resources or is part of a larger team or coalition that has them. And then if the theory of change, which I'm going to talk about more later, what theory of change means, but if the theory of change is that a court is going to give you a favorable decision, we need to hear both why it's likely to be a successful strategy, as well as why it's a good idea. If the idea is to get courts to agree with you, we need to hear why it's likely that they will, not simply that it would be good if they did. Because as we are all far too aware in this age, whether or not a court should agree with you or should rule in your favor is very different from whether or not it realistically will. All right, so that's a bit about our big emphasis and focus on affirmative litigation here at the Justice Catalyst Fellowship Program. With that, I want to talk about secondary strategies that are also often quite important as pieces of an affirmative litigation fellowship project. For example, movement building. So a lot of projects take direction from directly impacted communities and from organizers to guide their legal work. This is really key, and we see as an important piece of many projects. Researcher advocacy can also be very important pieces. With that in mind, I'll add we are very action-oriented. So if a research project is part of your plan for your fellowship, we want to hear not only that the research itself will be carried out, but also crucially that there is a specific and concrete plan to make actionable change based on the research that you'll be conducting as part of your project. So we want to be sure that if you're going to be doing research or advocacy, that conditions are right for that effort to have success. For example, a coalition already exists that needs that research to be accomplished in order to take key steps in their work, or for advocacy that there's a specific plan to carry it out, or a coalition already exists to support it. One example of many that could be named here is a project where a nonprofit we've had fellows at and collaborated with a lot, Arch City Defenders in St. Louis, as part of their Close the Workhouse campaign, had an active campaign to close the jail in St. Louis for many years, and then realized they needed a research paper to support the work that activists were doing. And that was the moment at which they produced the research to support their effort. So that's the kind of actionable research project that may make sense for a fellowship project. Speaking of coalitions, sometimes coalitions will have the greatest effect if there's already an existing coalition working on a topic that needs coordination or activation, or that needs infrastructure built to mobilize other lawyers. So that's something to keep in mind if coalition work is a part of your fellowship proposal. Separately, if the coalition doesn't yet exist, we want to hear from you if developing that coalition nascently is a part of your proposal. We want to hear that it can reasonably be done as part of a short-term, time-limited fellowship project. On community organizing or community education, we want to hear, is the audience or is the community already there to engage with that organizing or education? If it's community education, is the audience ready to be activated? How can they be more than an audience? How can they be empowered and work with you beyond just receiving information? How can they be activated, in particular, in a scalable way? And then finally, we are interested in pilots that can be replicated. So that speaks again to our emphasis on scalability and broad scale impact. And I should add, we recognize again that a lot of projects that are going to be successful will combine multiple of these approaches. Finally, we do not select projects that emphasize direct legal services or small scale litigation as a primary approach, although direct individual legal representation can be a minority component of a project, as long as that work is a necessary catalyst for other key elements of the project. So we think it works best when the direct representation is tied to the broader strategy for your project and they fit together, versus the direct representation being separate and compartmentalized from your underlying strategy and theory of change. That was a lot of information. To recap, here at Justice Catalyst Fellowships, we are especially enthusiastic about projects that apply already existing laws to a new subject area or situation and view the law as a tool for distributing wealth to harmed communities and holding powerful actors accountable for wrongdoing. A key emphasis across all approaches that your project may take is to ensure that your project has high potential to make broad scale or high volume impact. With that, I would love to hear again from all of you about what you think at this very early stage would be priority strategies for your potential fellowship project. So Elahe has pulled up a poll here. We'd love to hear, are you interested in litigation for your project, direct representation, again, as a priority strategy for your project, movement lawyering, community organizing, policy advocacy, research, coalition building, other, which we're excited to hear about in your prospectuses. Thanks so much for taking a moment. I'm seeing 3/4 litigation, more than half movement lawyering or community organizing, similarly on policy advocacy, less so on research, almost half on coalition building. Thank you all so much for sharing your answers on that. And we are really excited to learn a lot more from you about what you're proposing as the prospectus stage of our application process opens up in a couple of weeks. All right. I am going to cover one final piece that has been mentioned multiple times, and then we are going to hear from Sarah Medina Camascoli, our former Justice Catalyst Fellow, which we are really excited to hear from. So a theory of change is what connects your proposed approach to the problem it seeks to address. A theory of change can be really simple. It can be just 1 to 2 sentences explaining the precise mechanism by which your proposed approach will lead to your hoped for outcomes. For example, a litigation-focused project might seek to directly transfer resources to a harmed community, enforce a law in a new factual environment, dissuade a bad actor from continuing their practices, demonstrate to other lawyers that a litigation theory is viable, or persuade a judge to articulate a favorable precedent. Even if it feels like it should be obvious, please connect the dots for us in your application of what the actions will be in your project to what the hoped for outcomes will be. We have samples of successful theories of change along with additional guidance on how to craft a theory of change available on our website. So please feel free to check that out, and feel free to reach out to us at fellowships@justicecatalyst.org if you have any follow-up questions on the subject of a theory of change. All right, with that, I would love to hear from you, Sarah, if you want to pull up your video and unmute yourself. I'm so excited to introduce you all to one of our fabulous alums. Sarah led her project at Public Counsel's Opportunity Under Law project and Integrate NYC's Peer Defense project. She is now an assistant professor of law at Rutgers Law School, the People's Electric Law School, and is on the executive team at the nonprofit Peer Defense project. She has generously joined us to share a fellow's perspective on the application process and the fellowship experience. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Sarah. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Yes. Hey, y'all. It is wonderful to be with you here today. Super excited to have this conversation because I love talking to law students who are truly committed to working in ways that empower communities to use the law in a way that promotes justice. And there are so few of us. And so this is a really special community to be a part of here. So the folks at Justice Catalyst sent me a couple questions. I'm going to go over just a little bit more about my project, why I applied to Justice Catalyst versus some of the other fellowship opportunities, or if I was rejected from them, which I was. Tips for the Justice Catalyst application process, something positive about being a Justice Catalyst fellow, and then how this really helped catalyze to where I am today. So I'll start out a little bit with just a description of what my project was. I applied in 2020 to start in September 2021. And so I know there's a lot of information going, but right, you would start in about a year from today on your project. And so I said that I wanted to launch an innovative partnership between Integrate NYC, which was a youth social movement organization that I had founded as a public school teacher years before law school, and Public Counsel, which is the largest pro bono nonprofit legal service organization in the country, to develop an intergenerational movement lawyering strategy, which included litigation to promote racial justice and integration in New York City schools. The project joined a movement of youth organizers in New York City fighting for racial justice in partnership with Public Counsel and their impact litigation division. And the intention was to support student leaders that I had both taught when I was a public school teacher in the South Bronx and organized with during my time as an organizer before law school to realize their vision for school integration that centered the visions and the freedom dreams of youth organizers of color. And this was within the largest and most segregated school district in the country. And also back to the point that Renee was making, underneath state laws that guaranteed a right to a sound basic education, equal protection of the laws at the state level, and additional human rights protections that weren't necessarily available at the federal level. And to be clear, the longer term vision here was that this would support really a movement lawyering strategy. And so I want to jump into that a little bit. I also am going to put in the chat a little bit about movement lawyering because I have a lot of law students ask me about what movement lawyering is. And so essentially this is a YouTube video that shares about the difference between direct services, impact litigation, movement lawyering, and legal empowerment from the Movement Law Lab, which was helpful for me in my application. But why I chose Justice Catalyst for this project, again, working with young people to bring movement lawyering strategies, was because I believe that Justice Catalyst aligned with the values of movement lawyering and legal empowerment in a way that the other fellowships weren't necessarily creating space for. And so let me share a little bit about what I mean about that. So this is not to say that direct services are not worthwhile. This is not to say that other forms of lawyering are not worthwhile. However, it is oftentimes difficult to find a funder, find a fellowship that's willing to invest in something innovative, something that disrupts the traditional practices of lawyering that tend to support, elevate, and prioritize folks who own property, who have money, who are white or representing, who have access to these systems and can use them in ways that benefit historically privileged communities. And movement lawyering and legal empowerment, what's different about it and why I find Justice Catalyst unique is there's a commitment to increasing individuals' sense of their own power to understand, use, and shape the law. There's a commitment to changing power relations in communities where entrenched injustices have existed for decades, and also improving those material realities through strategies like affirmative litigation, but also other kinds of programming. And so what that looked like in my project in terms of the outcomes 4 years later, 100% of the young people that worked on my Justice Catalyst project with me are now either in law school, working or leading their own grassroots advocacy organizations, or working at firms. And why that's important is because the youth who I worked with didn't just sort of pop in and potentially get an idea about a lawsuit. They were really involved in building skills, and Justice Catalyst was interested in that. Further, the idea of changing power relations. Justice Catalyst was really interested. We had a youth-led plaintiff search that had never really been done before. Also, I was talking about one of the potential outcomes being building my own organization, which I lead today, the Peer Defense Project, as a result of the litigation and young people learning and understanding the law and wanting to take it into their own hands. Also improving material realities. So in addition to the lawsuit demanding there to be shifts in terms of the enrollment policies, the resourcing in schools, and the experience of the young people that we were suing on behalf of and our community partners, we also did a lot of work to create strategic networks, to create educational opportunities, and to create other leadership spaces that young people are historically gatekept from. And Justice Catalyst was interested in this. I didn't feel like it was something I had to hide behind something else that was more traditional. I was able to talk about it alongside the litigation strategy in a way that was true for me. In terms of my tips for the Justice Catalyst application process, I would say there are 3 things. You want to answer why you, why now, and why this project and this particular organization. So in terms of why you want to clearly talk about what are your experiences of pain or opportunity that have provided you with a unique perspective, skill set, sensitivity, professional experiences that allow you to actually commit to this for the long term. Justice Catalyst has, from my experience, they really want people who are in this for the long game. And so they want you all in 5 years, 6 years, 10 years to come back here and say, this is how the work has evolved. And so you want to really dig deep and find out what is going to sustain you in this work for the long term. It doesn't mean you have to pretend that you're going to do your project for a decade, but it means that you have to show that this is not just something you're doing before you go do X, Y, Z. This is truly something that you're investing in long term. The next piece is also about the relationships. So why you? If you're going to talk about a certain community that you either represent or you're going to bring change on behalf of, you kind of have to show Justice Catalyst that they would pick you too, right? Like if we're going to be investing in unconventional strategies and doing it on behalf of people who have been historically marginalized, how do we know you're the person that people trust or will work with for a year or two? In terms of why now, you want to be really clear about the context, the legal context, why you think you could win in the particular court that you would be suing in, with the particular strategy that you would be bringing, and also why that matters. Something that's really special about Justice Catalyst is there isn't just an assumption that litigation is good because litigation is good. You have to really show that this is going to make a change in people's everyday lives. When people wake up to them going to sleep at night after this litigation, people will have a shift that's net positive for them. And then the last piece is why this project at this org. The best advice I can give you is you can see so clearly if you are picking a project or an org that you don't have a relationship with. You have to build those relationships. Either you have a conversation or a commitment, you all are applying together, you have a pre-existing relationship. That relationship and a shared commitment to a project is so critical. It will either come through in your application or it will come through in your experience down the line if that is superficial and not genuinely committed and real. Something positive about being a Justice Catalyst Fellow is definitely the social relationships. I've chatted with Renee and Jacob and Aleja about many different things, about new ideas, projects, folks that I think would be great fits for other opportunities. Those relationships really matter. I think it's 3% of less than 4% of the profession work for low-income people for free. And so there's a small constituency of us out there who are just really committed to working for folks who can't afford a $600 consultation, but also want to change the system that creates that. The other piece is freedom in Justice Catalyst. You have a lot of freedom to be creative. And also, if your project evolves and that evolution is authentic to the impact you're going to make, Justice Catalyst is going to support you. And further, it's the excellence. Yes, you meet great people, and yes, you have freedom, but you're around a community of people who are really good at what they do, and other fellows that are just exceptional people and will be your friends, community, comrades for years to come. In terms of, I'll wrap up with how Justice Catalyst helped me do the work that I'm doing today. I felt really seen. As an older law student, as an ostensibly radical person with unique skills, when I came into law school, feeling very grounded in my work as an educator, as an organizer, as someone who weaved together movement leaders, I didn't always feel seen in law school. I felt like the things that I was providing were considered not legal or not relevant to the law. Also, as a first-generation college grad and a queer person in the Puerto Rican diaspora, I was unwilling to give up how I presented and communicated and worked. And I didn't feel like when I was interviewing at Justice Catalyst, I had to sort of zip it up or figure it out. I had to know my numbers and my relationships and my clarity and what I was bringing to the game, but I was able to show up as myself. And that really shifted my experience, not just in the application process, but applying to be a law professor, applying for other grants. Like, I got confidence here at Justice Catalyst that I did not get anywhere else. And so I show up like with all the joy and prep for this space because I felt seen by Justice Catalyst. I felt like I brought value to this profession in a way that in other places just felt misplaced or unsophisticated. And that was huge for me. Also, Justice Catalyst has really interesting relationships with universities, like the origin story and things like that. And so I started to see myself as being able to develop interesting relationships to not only build the public infrastructure for social change, but also the intellectual frameworks. That seeing the relationship between universities, organizers, law firms, and grantors, what really helped me to see creative ways to not just get stuck at one org or one project, but to have sort of a longer term ecosystem. And also the renewal funding is really important. That was really key for me to actually be able to get my footing and then allow the project to grow. Last thing about me, today I run the Peer Defense Project with youth organizers and educators in New York. We build free legal education networks and technical support to make law a superpower for youth activists. I also teach constitutional law, education law, and youth social movements at Rutgers. And I live with incredible joy and fulfillment in my work, and Justice Catalyst has been a true partner, comrade, and sponsor. If you're interested in Peer Defense Project or learning more, considering thinking about us as a host organization or thinking of ways to partner with us on your project, I'll put our website as well as our Calendly to sign up for a one-on-one. And happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It is always so inspiring to hear you speak and to get to connect and collaborate with you. We are so grateful and honored by you taking the time. So we really appreciate it. We are a little bit behind schedule. So if folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And we are going to move on to the rest of our programming. But one thing before we do that I just want to say is, Sarah, thanks so much for mentioning applying for fellowships and not getting them. That is also an experience that I had. My first time applying for a fellowship, I spent hours and weekends during law school putting together this passion project, and it ultimately wasn't selected. And I think it's just so important for all of us to realize that that's a part of the process. And also here at Justice Catalyst, we're trying to think about ways that we can value your time as much as possible. So to that end, I'm going to talk to you about our prospectus process, which we hope will save time. And also, I just want to say, I think a lot of us who may be considered radical, as you said, Sarah, come into law school and feel very lost or isolated. And our goal here at Justice Catalyst is to help law students and recent law school students realize that there are very different ways to think about the law as a tool, to think about the legal ecosystem, and to think about who we are and how we can show up in community in this work, that oftentimes there just is no space for that in these institutions. So thank you so much for mentioning that explicitly, Sarah. We really, really value that. All right. So Sarah, again, thank you so much for your time. If you want to stay on for the Q&A at the end of the webinar, you are welcome to, or we really want to allow you, just like Pam, to go on to the many other things that we know you have on your plate. So thank you again so much. And either way, feel free to stay on, or if you need to, head out.
Yeah, I'm happy to just kind of disappear for a little bit, but I'll be on here for the Q&A if people have any questions.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. So I want to just point out that if we could spend more time talking about specific concrete fellowship projects, we would, but we have so much content to cover that we can't spend any more time beyond that beautiful story of Sarah's work. So with that, Elahe has dropped in the chat a link to our website, which has practically every single fellowship project that has ever existed, as well as information and news articles and blog posts about the project. So please feel free to check that out on our website. And if you have follow-up questions, you can always reach out to us. So let's talk about the prospectus. So a prospectus, the prospectus submissions will be open via a form on our website between September 1st and 30th. And responses to prospectus submissions will come on a rolling basis through early November. The short prospectus stage of our application process is an opportunity for you to summarize for us the problem you seek to address and your idea for addressing it. It is a low time investment way, we hope, to know whether you should take the time and energy to submit a full application. And that is by getting feedback from us early on in your thinking about your project, whether or not it's a good fit for the fellowship, and where appropriate to receive some specific suggestions from us for your final application. So we really encourage you in the prospectus to be succinct, use bullet points versus full sentences, and simply include the basic information that will allow us to understand what you intend to do and to evaluate whether it's a good fit for submission of a full application. We, as part of the prospectus, ask you to include a list of peoples, both lawyers and non-lawyers, that you've contacted or would like to contact and speak with as part of developing your project, in addition to potential host organizations. This listening tour, as we call it, helps you gather a wide range of input, which is vital to developing your proposal and ensuring that your work is not duplicative or counterproductive. And these initial contacts may well turn into collaborations and partnerships during your fellowship. To that end, I want to note you are not required to have secured a host organization by the time you submit your prospectus. The prospectus is intended as a work in progress, and we welcome the opportunity to work with you to turn your initial idea into a more detailed plan of action. So again, please don't hesitate to submit through the form on our website some bullet points about what you're thinking, even if you don't yet have a firm or detailed proposal. So we've been asked, what does feedback on your prospectus entail? And our feedback on your prospectus is a very succinct email that states either your project proposal sounds great, we'd love to see a full application on it. Your proposed project may be a good fit, we recommend you make XYZ tweaks or additions and submit a full application. Or your proposed project isn't a good fit for a Justice Catalyst Fellowship this year. We don't recommend you spend your valuable time, energy, and love putting together a full application. We get a question on, if you get that third answer from us, does it mean you are not allowed to submit the full application? No, it does not. If we say this doesn't seem like a good fit, you can disregard that and still submit a full application. Just be aware that based on the information we received in the prospectus, it didn't seem likely to be a good fit. However, we will absolutely review all of the full applications that we receive. I should also note that we review hundreds of prospectuses, so we don't have the capacity to provide follow-up feedback beyond that initial response to your prospectus. But we really hope that by going through the prospectus process, you can get more feedback on whether or not it's a good idea to submit a full application and how you can best do so. All right. One final thing I should say about the prospectus. It is the details of exactly what questions are asked are on our website. So I'm not going to go through every single question here, but if you have questions after you review our website about what the prospectus entails, you are welcome to reach out to us, again, at the fellowships@justicecatalyst.org email address. All right, let's go ahead and talk briefly about the final application. Similarly, every single question that is on the final application, along with word count requirements, is on our website, so you can review all those details there. But in short, it includes a summary of information about your project, a longer project description. It asks for your resume. I want to underscore that we do not require your GPA, and that does not factor into our decision whatsoever. We ask for 2 references, and we ask for your host to also submit a brief host commitment letter. So again, that application will be open on our website from October 15th to December 2nd. And Justice Catalyst values diversity of all kinds in our fellowship program and strongly encourages individuals of diverse backgrounds to apply. So if you wish to let us know how you would contribute to the diversity of our fellowship class, you may do so as part of the application form. Also, I should just note, we don't accept letters of recommendation, just the 2 references. All right, and I know we're getting questions on a rolling basis in the Q&A. I just want to note to folks, please don't hesitate, keep on submitting questions. Jacob is kindly answering them in writing that you all should be able to see, and we're going to be diving into FAQs and a live Q&A here in a moment as well. But finally, to close out what our application process entails, after submitting the full application, we dive into the interviews and final decision stage. So interviews take place via Zoom on a rolling basis in January and February. Our interviews are friendly and focused on the details of your project in particular. So we get really excited to meet and speak with so many brilliant, creative thinkers across the country as a part of this interview process, and really like to dive in and have an organic conversation about what your plans are, the context in which your project will exist, and what you bring to that project and vision. All right, a little bit about the Justice Catalyst Fellowship Program. So our program is a bit different from other traditional larger fellowship programs. We really focus on creating an environment that allows fellows to take advantage of what they want to, and to have a lot of autonomy and opportunity to just focus on their project if that's their preference. We do a couple of individual one-on-one check-ins over Zoom over the course of your first year. We also have some group calls that allow you to build a peer-to-peer community with the other fellows. I was so happy to hear Sarah mention the incredible folks that she met through our fellowship program. We feel honored and excited to get to know all of the fellows every single opportunity that we can here at Justice Catalyst. And it really is an opportunity to have a connection across disciplines, across issue areas, across regions, where you can learn about the creative strategic thinking that other fellows are doing. Maybe you can apply some of those opportunities or thinking to your own project. Certainly as an alum, you can always draw upon this rich community as well. So that's what our group calls are really about, is fostering that peer-to-peer community. To that end, we also have a book/movie club where we meet monthly over Zoom and read a book or an article, or talk about a movie that we all chose together to watch. That's a really wonderful opportunity to also think outside the box. We don't limit it to nonfiction. We read memoirs, we read fiction, and it's a really wonderful and one of my favorite pieces of our fellowship programming. We also hold workshops that are available for fellows to join with national experts across a really wide range of issue areas. Sarah joined us for a workshop this year. We had a workshop on FOIA matters, on community-driven litigation, on workers' rights and working with government agencies effectively. So we really try to introduce fellows to a lot of different folks and a lot of different ways of thinking about how you can use your law degree to make broad-scale structural change. Finally, we also have some opportunities for substantive collaboration with the Justice Catalyst law team. If an opportunity arises on your project, maybe we can co-counsel or provide some other type of substantive expertise where useful to advance your project. Finally, I consider it a very important part of my work to be available as a resource for fellows and alums at any time, whether it's during your fellowship or 5 years or more after your fellowship, to reach out to me to talk about your career, where you are, what you want to do, and just have a thought partner and support when it comes to what you're doing with your law degree to continue making that structural change. And I will add, Sarah also hit the nail on the head with regard to how important it is to us that Justice Catalyst Fellows have the opportunity to really continue this important work, whether it be on their specific project or, more importantly, broadly on social justice work. 97% of our fellows actually remain in social justice work coming out of their fellowship project. And I think that is really a testament to the incredible human beings that we have the privilege of working with as fellows, and the incredible host organizations and so much more that is a really integral part of the Justice Catalyst Fellowship. All right, I am going to go ahead and dive into some frequently asked questions. These are from questions that we receive in our email inbox, that we received after our webinar last year, and that we think are important for folks to hear. So last year we were asked about whether specific types of internships, clinics, externships, or post-grad experiences, such as clerkships or other fellowships, impact the strength of an application, and how much of an impact those things have compared to the project and placement on our teams and our reviewers' assessment of your application. And the answer is that we are a lot less concerned with checking off boxes on your resume than by demonstration of the way you think about your project strategy or strategies vis-a-vis your theory of change, and the strategy and project description that you articulate in your application. So we don't expect fellows to necessarily have a resume that indicates you know, having checked off a bunch of traditional boxes that are considered impressive in our overly hierarchical legal paradigm here in the US. You know, if you have a clerkship that you feel is applicable to your project, that's great, but we are not obsessed with, you know, where you've worked or traditional indicators of success, as you might call it. We do, like I mentioned, find that candidates who have been in an internship or externship at their host organization often have the strongest applications and the best understanding of the issues relevant to their proposed project. And I really appreciated the way that Sarah talked about demonstrating who you are and where you're coming from and your way of thinking and how that is going to impact how you approach your project. People also often ask about acceptance rate and volume of applicants for the fellowship. So we have about 10 to 20 fellows in our cohort each year. Many of them are on our website. Some of them are not on our website, but most of them are, and you can see examples there. As I mentioned, we receive several hundred prospectus submissions, and about half of those submit a full application. And last year, from those full applications, we had an 8% acceptance rate. And that acceptance rate, again, does vary year to year. We have also been asked whether we have a preference between 3L candidates and those who are up to 2 years out of law school. We don't have a preference. One thing that we really hope the Justice Catalyst Fellowship can provide to law students is a recognition that you do not have to, like I said, have certain things on your resume or have gone to a certain law school or have a certain GPA in order to be a very important strategic and creative and passionate part of making structural change through our legal ecosystem and using the law as a tool for that change. So we are very excited about candidates, whether they are law students or have some experience out of law school. And we think that, in fact, sometimes when you have less entrenchment in our legal system, you may bring to the table an important perspective that questions some of the traditional dynamics and paradigms that we're seeking to upend through the fellowship project. As a data point, about half of the folks selected for the fellowship last year were 3Ls, and about half were about a year or more out of law school. But that really varies and depends on the year. We've gotten questions about the renewal process. So as I mentioned earlier, the Justice Catalyst Fellowship is a one-year fellowship, guaranteed for 1 year, with an option to request to renew your fellowship midway through the first year. The majority of renewals, you can request a renewal for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or an additional 12 months after that first year. The majority of renewals that we make are for an additional 9 to 12 months. Some are for 3 to 6 months. And the length of that renewal depends on multiple factors, including how long the fellow requests to renew for, how long the host organization wants to renew for, and how much more time we believe is needed in order to accomplish the goals of the project, including whether or not those goals of the project have shifted. Most fellows do request to renew their fellowship, and every year the majority of fellows who request renewal receive one. The exact numbers vary year to year. The flip side of this is that every year there are some projects that are not renewed, but to reiterate, the majority of projects do get renewed. Also, and this is really important and exciting, as we've launched our Justice Catalyst Access Fund that I talked about early on, we have increased the volume of fellowship projects that employ litigation as a primary strategy and are increasingly looking to fund renewals partially or fully via Justice Catalyst Access Fund. That is also really excitingly a mechanism to help host organizations keep fellows on beyond even a second year of their fellowship. Finally, we've been asked whether candidates working remotely, hybrid, or in person are weighted any differently when we review applications, and the answer is that they are not. But we do take into account factors such as what type of work they're doing and whether it's conducive to remote work, if applicable, and what type of mentorship and supervision they're likely to receive and need, depending on their experience level, who they are, what they want out of the fellowship experience, and what their project proposal is. There are a lot more FAQs available on our website, and Elahe will drop the link in the chat to that. But again, if you ever have any questions that you can't find the answer to on our website or that aren't answered here today, you are always welcome to email us anytime. All right, that is the end of me talking at all of you. Thank you so much again. And now I want to invite Jacob and Sarah to turn on their videos and give everyone an opportunity to ask any additional questions through the Q&A that you may have. Also, if Jacob, you have answered any questions that you have seen here that you think would be helpful to reiterate verbally for everyone right now, we'd love to hear that as well. And then Sarah, if anything else has come to mind as you have watched this webinar, please feel free to raise that and share your thinking on it as well. So one question that came up was whether or not you can submit multiple project ideas in your prospectus. And the answer is yes, you absolutely can, and we will provide feedback on all of them. We also had a question of how many rounds of interviews there are, and the answer is that for the Justice Catalyst Fellowship, there is just a single interview. We were asked whether or not there is a preference on types of references, and the answer is it's totally fine if it comes from The host organization, like if you were an intern there and they were your summer supervisor, or if it was a professor or a clinic reference, that would be totally fine, even if they're both from the same school. We're really interested in folks that can simply speak, with experience to who you are and how that's applicable to your project. If anyone has any other questions, now is the opportunity. But Jacob, based on your experience running this fellowship program for many years before I came on board, is there anything else that you think is worthy of noting? Or perhaps anything going back to what I think was perhaps one of the most complex segments of our webinar, which was talking about our priority strategies, some of our thinking about those and the importance in the application process. For example, demonstrating your impact or your theory of change in a thoughtful way.
I think you covered it very well, but can't emphasize enough that we're interested in projects that aim at broad scale change. So we want to hear about that, and that'll be part of the application and in the prospectus. And that we've always had a lot of affirmative litigation projects, but that's increasingly the case. So if you look at the most recent fellowship class, I think that's relatively representative of that. If you look back to older classes, there's probably a broader mix of theories of change than there have been more recently, and we're increasingly focusing on litigation. So yeah, those are the two that I call out. And I guess another thing that if this isn't clear to you, or you come away thinking you're not sure if your project is a good fit, that's exactly why we have the prospectus. We're not grading the prospectuses on being perfectly formatted and everything being 100% worked out the way it might be in the full application. The whole purpose of it is to make it easier for you to just tell us your idea, and for us to give you feedback and let you know if it makes sense to do the full application. So that's the prospectus is there to make your life easier, to avoid you wasting time. That really encourage you to submit one, even if it's a half-baked idea. We want to hear it, and then you'll know whether it makes sense to then follow up and give more detail.
To that end, there's a good question here. When it comes to the prospectus, word limits are relatively low. So what do you think are the most important things to emphasize? And I would just say we're really excited in the prospectus about the strategies and about the theory of change, and additional details can come in the application. Jacob, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's right. So we want to understand what the project is you want to do, and we don't, like, some of what we've said needs to come across later in the full application about and some of what Sarah spoke to as well about the fit with the community and why this makes sense in this particular place. You don't need to demonstrate all of that to us at the prospectus stage. So giving the broad strokes of the idea so we can see if it's the kind of project that makes sense for Justice Catalyst is the most important.
Sarah, if like sharing what felt the hardest for you in the application process, and how you overcame any hurdles or barriers or mental blocks that you experienced, because these applications can be quite intense and challenging to accomplish. And how did you do it? And do you have any recommendations to folks who are going through the process?
Yeah. So I would say the relationship building with the host org is probably the part of the fellowship process that is the least, like, I gave the least amount of energy to initially. Like, I had the relationship with the community, but the attorneys that I was going to work with, I didn't quite understand the different processes. So some host organizations already have set up a process for you interviewing to possibly be the fellow if they get the fellowship. Some host organizations have never had a fellow. Some host organizations are only willing to hire people who interned for them. And so that was a little bit confusing for me. And sometimes I would ask questions and I would be sort of embarrassed because I would say, can I be your fellow? And I wouldn't even know how to answer the follow-up questions. So what I would recommend for that is just essentially reaching out to someone in like the fundraising space. I think this is a helpful framework because this is sort of like you're getting a foray into fundraising slightly, where I'd try to find the front door, the back door, and the side door. So the front door is like their general, like, hello at whatever organization, right? Like, hi, I'm looking for a fellowship. But then I would do that deeper work of going into your LinkedIn, going into your alumni sort of networks, different ways of saying, has anyone been a fellow, looking at Justice Catalyst past fellow, and reaching out to people directly at those host orgs and being like, hey, could you make some connections for me? And then asking, what's your process? And asking the host org first what they're looking for. Because if you just show up with your own project that you think is going to be a fit, kind of awkward. It's like asking someone to go on vacation on your first date, right? So you want to think about this relationship building a little bit when you start. The other thing I wanted to say too is someone had put in the Q&A a while ago about specifics. So let me be specific about specifics. So in terms of the litigation, I had to do legal research to understand why my idea was feasible. So when Renee was talking about that, you're going to have to basically spend time understanding why the intervention you're going to make would be successful, looking at past cases, looking at the ways that you're sort of going to follow in that similar precedent, or you believe there's a new, the court composition has changed, or other things like that. And then in terms of your secondary strategies, don't just say things like movement lawyering. You can go on Westlaw and Lexis and other platforms that maybe other research platforms, and look into what are examples of movement lawyering. There's plenty of articles written on that, and sort of say, I would like to bring a strategy like was brought in this labor movement, or was brought in Integrated NYC, which created like an education program to teach young people about their rights. But I would look deeply into examples and talk about how yours is going to be slightly different to get to that specificity. In terms of PDP, where we evolved was, at the time, what I said we were going to do was we were going to do this peer observer program where young people could observe in their schools where their rights were violated as part of the investigation. That now has changed into an educational training program. So you can take a look at our site too. And again, I'm happy to talk to you about how the things you see here were initially seed strategies for the fellowship project.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I would also add, that's one of the reasons I mentioned that for many candidates that we see, folks who have already been at their host organization or been working on the relevant issue area can often have kind of deeper insights without having to do research just specifically for the application. They've already had experience in the areas of law. They've already had experience on those issue areas. They have a sense of the relevant communities and the context, whether it's the judicial context or otherwise. And so that can really help you have a sense of those initial details to kickstart your thinking on your project and your strategies.
But don't let that discourage you from reaching out to other organizations if you haven't that you haven't worked at, or if the places you have worked aren't the right fit. It certainly can give you a head start. But plenty of fellows have applied successfully who haven't worked previously at the host organizations as well. And there's plenty of time still before the full application to build those relationships in the types of ways that Sarah was describing.
Yeah, and I hadn't worked for my host organization either prior to with public counsel prior to the application process, but I did have some relationships to show that like I could fulfill and that folks were committed to it. So I hope I didn't overemphasize my relationship to my initial host org.
Thank you both for that. And to that end, also, that's where the relationship with the host org can be helpful too, because you may have a sense of the problem that you are seeking to address in the world, and you may find a handful of host organizations to reach out to that work on relevant issue areas to that problem, and they can also help you with the context of strategies and existing coalitions and all of those details, and you can work collaboratively with them as well. Some fellowship programs have an emphasis on the whole idea or proposal coming from the fellow or vice versa, and to us, we're agnostic on that topic. We're interested simply in a fellow and host organization that are on the same page and are taking, the lead can come from either side depending on the need in a particular instance.
I'll answer this question that just came in, which I'll answer live, is given the array of issues that can be funded, does Justice Catalyst have any rhythm or pattern of selecting from project areas, or is it primarily focused on the strongest projects? I'd say it's primarily focused on the strongest projects, but we did have a slide up, and it's also on the on our website of some priority areas. Some of that is more a statement about that we get fewer applications and not necessarily in those areas, not necessarily that we do more projects in those areas. But I think that's a good place to start, is looking at that list.
Thanks, Jacob. All right, we have one more question that we can turn to before we wrap up. If we already have a host org we're applying to other fellowships with, but they don't practice the priority strategy isn't strategic litigation, is it still worth applying to Justice Catalyst? So a couple things on that. Number one, we know that many folks are going to apply to multiple different fellowship programs, and that is totally fine. We welcome candidates who are also applying to Equal Justice Works or SCADN or any other fellowship programs. With that said, I would say over time, the Justice Catalyst Fellowship in particular, as we're placing a greater emphasis on litigation, you will probably want to think about different approaches or tweaking your approach to make sure that it aligns with some of what we shared about the priority strategies. With that said, again, number one, not all of the projects have to be focused on affirmative litigation. And number two, it is very rare that a project will have only one strategy or approach. Oftentimes a successful project is going to take multiple approaches combined to be successful. Jacob, would you add anything to that?
I guess I'm not sure exactly the frame that whoever asked this is asking in, but if it's about can you do strategic litigation at an organization, even if that's kind of not their expertise, it will depend on the type of litigation, whether they have the resources. Sometimes there have been projects which partner between multiple. There's one kind of host that's the employer, but another organization that's very aligned with them and is part of the project team in a way. So that can happen. But if it's say it's a direct services project you're applying for other fellowships with, and you apply for that same project with us, it's unlikely that you'll be selected, but also no harm in submitting a quick prospectus.
Thank you for that, Jacob. Okay, with that, let's turn to our contact us slide so that you all, if you want, can get our email address if you haven't already gotten it. And with that, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining us. Thank you to Pam, even though she's not with us anymore. Thank you so much to you, Sarah, for your invaluable time and contributions. And thank you again to each of you for taking your very precious time to spend with us. We are extremely excited to see your prospectus submissions and your applications. And we really appreciate all of you joining us. So have a wonderful rest of your day.